Okay, should we start?
Yes. That's the general CSC.
Okay.
Just
When we're up. Let's start. Okay. Good evening, everyone. This is the Council Sustainability Committee meeting of September 4th, 2024. This meeting is being conducted with a virtual component. Anyone wishing to address the CSC virtually may join the meeting on Zoom using the link or phone number and webinar ID shown on the screen. When the chair announces the item on which you wish to speak, click on the raise hand feature in Zoom or dial *9 on your phone. When the chair calls your name to provide public comment, if you're participating via phone, please press *6 to unmute yourself. For in-person attendees, please fill out a speaker card, which you can find on the sign-in table to the left of the door. So that is we call to order item number 1. We'll now move to item number 2, which is roll call. Ms. Lee, can we take roll call?
Certainly. Chair Hicks,
Here.
Member Abe-Koga,
Here.
Member Showalter.
We'll now move to item number 3, which is approving the minutes. This would be the Council Sustainability Committee minutes of May 29, 2024. Do any members have comments or questions about the meeting minutes? Okay, seeing none. Would anyone, so are there any people either in the audience or online who would like to speak about the minutes?
No.
No hands, no blue cards. Okay, so now, would any members like to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so all those in favor, raise your hand. Okay, passes unanimously. Now we have item number 4, which is oral communications from the public. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the committee on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. State law prohibits the CSC from acting on non-agendized items. So, would any member of the public like to provide comment on an item that is not on the agenda? If so, either raise your hand, click the raise hand button in Zoom, or if you have an in-person comment, turn in a speaker card.
No one on Zoom.
No one in person. Okay, so we're done with item number 4. We're now moving to item number 5, new business, discussion and action items. I've had a request from staff. They thought it would be might flow better for our conversation if we have item number 5.2, which is the verbal updates on sustainability and resiliency division work. If they put that first, because it's going to inform possibly the discussion on the consulting group's scope of work. So are there any objections to that by the committee? Okay, in that case, we will have the verbal update on sustainability and resiliency division work, and the item will be presented by Sustainability Division staff. Ms. Lee will commence the presentation.
Thank you, Chair Hicks. We just wanted to take a moment to talk with the committee about some of the work that's been underway within the Sustainability and Resiliency Division. as we embark on the planning process of developing a climate strategy for the city. We just wanted to underscore that the work continues. So we're really pleased to be sharing an update with all of you around some of the significant strides we've been making, especially in the decarbonization arena. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Lucky to start the presentation, and all of the staff will be presenting various components.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. So our first slide really talks about our new team members that are joining the team. So this is our 5th year participating in the Climate Core Fellows Program. And so we'll be hosting 2 climate fellows starting next week, and they're going to help with analysis and supporting our outreach and some of our other activities such as Earth Day. And we in turn, we also provide leadership development for them and understanding how local government works in climate action as well. And so it's a 10-month fellowship. So this fellowship will be ending around July 15th. We also have 2, so our 2 fellows up here, their names are Remy, losing the names here. Remy Rin and Grace Kahn. And our Cool Block program assistants, they're partially funded by a county grant. And it's to really help neighborhoods build cohorts to learn how to decarbonize their homes, changing from gas to electric. And this program, we're looking to start cohorts in the fall and the spring, and it will end in summer of 2025. And so the picture on the left is Dylan Waitman. He's already started, and we've extended an offer for another candidate as well. So we're hoping to get them on board. Yeah, and they are part-time positions, so they work no more than 20 hours a week. So the next slide. So some grant updates as well. We're looking at, or we've already applied for a grant to install EV charging at our senior center up to 8 ports. So we're working in partnership with Silicon Valley Clean Energy, as well as the city of San Jose. They've put together a regional application that's worth $15 million, and it's funded by the U.S. Department of Transportation. So we're hoping to get this award. I'll report back on when we would hear back, but it's one we're very excited about. And we have another update about the Environmental Protection Agency grant that we applied for. It went to City Council back in June or May. And we were unfortunately not awarded that grant. It was also with Santa Clara County and partner cities and Silicon Valley Clean Energy. And we had 2 projects that we were submitting under that grant. It was the reusable foodware system design. It was $35 million across the region. And one for a public facilities resiliency project that was $50 million. And we were hoping that those funds could help us with the solar array that was approved by the city council. So we're going to still be looking for opportunities as we move forward for these public facility projects that we've awarded contracts for and to keep the projects moving forward.
In the areas of community decarbonization, we have updates about our plant-based eating program. A request for proposals will be released this month for a consultant to develop and pilot a program for restaurants in Mountain View to offer more plant-based menu items. We also, in the area of EV charging, have been making additional progress, and have directly outreached to the owners of over 600 multifamily properties about a free PG&E direct install electric vehicle charging program. So we're hoping to encourage as many local Mountain View property owners to participate in that as we can. And we are also conducting a gap analysis to understand the charging needs for multifamily residents throughout the city.
Continuing on the community decarbonization front, we're also working on building electrification. One of the efforts is launching the Year of the Water Heater campaign, which is a year of, engaging the community on the benefits of heat pump water heaters and how they can take steps themselves to make that change from gas to electric. And we really envision a variety of outreach strategies as a part of that, including events in the community like farmers markets and other events where we can really engage a really wide range of our residents. We are currently developing and marketing the 3rd Cool Block cohort, and we just awaited to the staff hired to support that. And we are continuing to work with Block Power on multifamily building opportunity analysis. We just received a very near final draft of the tool that will help us to do so, and we're working on the outreach campaign for that effort. We are working on assembling a cross-departmental team that has formed to move forward the REACH code work. And the development of the pre-wire requirements are currently underway, and we are coming back to council with those requirements this fall. We're also looking at analyzing building electrification zoning incentives, and there's already educational materials that we've partnered with the building division to make available at the building counter on electrification. And lastly, we're continuing to partner with Silicon Valley Clean Energy on the REACH code, and that includes the development and adoption of the triennial energy code update. We are continuing to lead as a city to as well on building decarbonization. As you know, the city council awarded the solar array contract for 3 city facilities in June, so that is moving forward. And 13 water heaters have been converted already in existing city facilities from gas to heat pump water heaters. And that has been done at no cost through a PG&E program. And we do anticipate some utility bill savings from that program. And you may recognize that water heater from the teen center. I caught them kind of just in the middle of construction there. Lastly, we are working again cross-departmentally on fleet and building electrification with our colleagues in public works and other departments.
We're excited to announce that the e-bike voucher pilot program has been completed. We received 128 eligible applications, and the vast majority of them were from the lowest income category, which is below 30% of the area median income. 85 vouchers of $1,300 to $1,500 were used across 3 bike shops, and we did a post-program survey. We got a lot of great feedback, and the data also supported that these e-bikes were replacing car trips a lot of the time. 82% would not have purchased an e-bike without the voucher. 64% ride the e-bike at least 2 days a week, and most cited that prior to the program, their most common transportation mode was driving a gasoline car. There's a couple of testimonials and photos from participants on the slide. And yeah, as I said, we had a lot of positive feedback. And also in addition to, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, people cited that it helps increase their mobility. Maybe, because of their health issues, they couldn't ride a normal bike as far anymore. Now they could ride their e-bike around. It also helps them access recreation and exercise. So there's, other benefits beyond emissions.
In other outreach and events news, we have attended a handful of events listed here since May, as well as hosting our June plant-based picnic out in front of City Hall. We've focused on building electrification using our all-electric Bluey dollhouse, as well as demonstrating induction cooking live. We've recently developed business cards to promote Silicon Valley Clean Energy's Go Electric Advisor program. And we will be attending the upcoming city event, Dia de Muertos, to continue our outreach.
So for upcoming city council items to be on the lookout for, we're looking at a few more grants. So that's always good news. So we're going to be applying for the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant. So this is a non-competitive grant, and the city is estimated to receive $148,000 from that, and it will support the senior center electrification projects that are currently underway. So we're electrifying the cooking equipment there, the water heating, and so this will be really helpful for that project. We also were awarded a grant from Santa Clara County, $25,000 to support vulnerable community members during heat events in the city, so that we can provide them with resiliency packs like this one you see here, a chill out heat relief pack. So it's got some ice packs in there, some electrolytes kind of that you could powder form that you could put in water to kind of keep people hydrated during these extreme heat events. And we'll be also working with a nonprofit to help distribute those packs as well. So there's more to come on that you'll be hearing about. And then, of course, a topic for tonight is, we're looking to go back to council in October to award the contract to Cascadia Consulting Group to support the development of the climate strategy. So, okay.
Thank you. So now, now that we've had the updates, are there any committee member questions on this item? We have questions, then we'll have comments from the audience and then comments from the committee. So are there any committee member questions? Mayor?
Yeah, I have several questions. Thank you for the updates. It's really wonderful to hear on this, all these great activities that the city is involved in to promote our sustainability. I wondered what is the incentive that you get, the voucher you get for an e-bike? How much is that?
So we had a tiered system based on the income brackets. So the highest was 1,500 for the below 30% AMI. And then 1,300 for 30 to 50% AMI, and then 1,000 for 50 to 80% AMI. But we actually I think 81 of the vouchers we gave out were the 1,500 to that lowest group, and that was all of them that applied and were eligible. And then the other 4 were the middle group. And so 1,300.
E-bike cost about.
So they range, they're kind of from range, they can be as cheap as about like 1,200, 1,300, but you could easily get a high end one that's like $3,000. But we do have some analysis on, because we, in the survey and from the results from Actera ran the program from us, they looked at how much was the out of pocket cost for folks as well. And it ranged a lot by bike shop, but some folks were able to cover the whole cost of the bike. Most people had to spend a couple $100. And that was some feedback we got was, the bikes are still expensive, for some folks, it was hard to, front the extra money. So that was something that we're taking into account with the valuation.
But still, that's a tremendous percentage of it.
Yeah.
That's good. Okay. And is this e-bike program expected to continue? Do we have funding for it?
We were looking into it and be happy to.
Okay, all right. And then the other question I had is about the electric efficiency and conservation block grants. This is the second year we've gotten it, isn't it? Or is this the first?
We have received, the Department of Energy has conducted the ECBG block grants previously. I don't know how many times Mountain View has received
Okay.
it, but
Because I remember hearing about it from NLC and our meetings, and there was a long time when there wasn't any money put
Right.
into it.
and
But I
they've
thought
refunded.
last year they started it, this year, so I was just.
Right, and they delayed the application window for this most recent cycle. Originally, it was more like in the spring. They delayed it till the fall, so. But we'll be coming to council in October with it.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Questions. For the EPA grant, are we planning to go out again? And did we get some feedback from the EPA?
We did meet with the EPA to get feedback. They actually even were suggesting additional grant programs to
Oh,
consider.
good, okay.
And then we are going to be meeting with our new federal lobbyists soon to debrief with them and talk about other funding opportunities. So,
Great.
yes.
With the charging, EV charging station grants, so is it 15 million for the entire SVC in San Jose?
Right.
And then our part would be 8.
Correct.
How much is that approximately?
Denise, do you remember the amount for the 8 chargers at the senior center? Or was it?
I could look back at, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was half of that amount is for SVCE territory of the 15 million and half is for San Jose.
Okay.
But we do have an estimate. I could follow up.
Thank you. And then with the PG&E charging program, you sent out 600 postcards. Have we heard back from anyone yet? I don't know when they went out, but.
Right.
do we
And
have
I-
takers on
I
that.
think we were directing them to the SVCE program, so we can find out through
Oh,
SVCE
okay.
the participation rate.
Is it, oh, so it's PG&E or SVC?
It's both. We're advertising both of them.
Okay,
We've asked them to reach out directly to the program administrator, so we
okay,
have.
so we just did the.
Which is Ecology Action.
Yeah, and some of them are still going out, so we'll continue to hear.
Okay, great. Great, well, thank you. Thanks for all the great work.
Jumping on that question, one of mine is a little more about the apartment chargers, the multifamily charging. How does that work? If I lived in a multifamily apartment, I would request it personally or the apartment? I don't know anything about it, request. it.
Yeah, I think typically the property owner or
Property
manager
owner,
would be
okay.
the one to make the
So
decision.
that it's open to everyone.
And that's what the mailers were addressed to those
I see.
parties,
Okay.
not the residents, because they
That
don't,
makes
they don't
sense.
have the ability.
Although residents that have electric cars and want to get them, that would be good to interact with them.
We
I
have
think
heard
SVC
from residents.
Yeah, I think SVCE allows like the resident to apply, but then it's a first come, first serve up to their $50,000 cap for the property. They've made a little bit of an adjustment. It depends, like if you're in a condo kind of setting where you have your own space
I see.
and you may want to run a line. They consider that multifamily, but the PG&E program, it's more of like the whole property needs to, or the property owner needs to work with the PG&E program administrators.
Yeah, I'm curious how that works, exactly how that works. Do you, if you have a small multifamily apartment, do you have to make sure that there's actually someone there who wants to use it? Or I don't know if you're in the weeds. on that
Yeah,
one.
no, it's just what they'll do is they'll go to the site, determine how much electricity capacity they have to bring to different parking spots.
Mhm.
And then offer, a direct install program. Before it was limited to, environmental justice areas or disadvantaged neighborhoods,
I
but
see.
they've run that program, so now they're ready to take the next step
Branch
to open
out.
up to everybody. They haven't quite marketed it that way on their website yet, but it is available to market rate and affordable or disadvantaged neighborhoods that have multifamily properties.
And it can be for future potential tenants as well. So a property
Mhm.
owner might want to install AV charging to entice
Right,
future residents to move in.
right. And as we have more and more electric, hopefully somebody at everybody at every apartment.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so I'd love to hear in future updates how that rolls out, because I totally understand how it works in single family homes, but this is a kind of a curious situation to me. And do we have any data on our public charging, like at the senior center and here and all, which are most used? I use the one at Nob Hill sometimes, but when I need a fast charge, because I have a slow charge at home. I'd just be curious what kinds of places are most used so that we would know, are we putting them in optimal places? Do people prefer to charge at grocery stores because you're waiting, you want something to do, or distributed through the neighborhood? I'd just love to know what's used and maybe what's.
I put some analysis just for our city-owned one, so I couldn't compare it to like a grocery store or something, but our downtown chargers are the most heavily used, the ones at 850 California Street and at 135 Bryant Street. So next to the CVS and down near the end of Castro, are let used, and the Civic Center is used a little less, but all of them are used a little more frequently than our community center chargers, but all have pretty high utilization. And I also just wanted to follow up, I did confirm, it's about 300K for the senior center. So,
And I'd love in future updates to hear, that may change as more people get chargers. Because I know how I use it. I slow charge at home, but if I have to fast charge, I go somewhere else. So it might be good to have it distributed, but I'd just love to know what's appears to be optimal as we roll them out. Okay, my other maybe you said you had outreach flyers, I guess, at the building counter. Are you putting them at the planning counter also?
We can check on that, but where the building counter and the planning counter, they have the same. It's like right at the front of the counter, whereas there's like cards and we have a placard.
Okay, so it's all.
But we can talk to the planning
Same.
division about the education component as well.
Yeah.
If it comes up through their conversations.
Yeah, because I know with people I know, sometimes they're just doing something through building and sometimes they're
Yeah.
doing something larger
That's true,
and it
yeah.
might be good to hit on both. Oh, and can you tell me a little more about the Go Electric Advisor Program? I know that for people I know who've been going electric, having an advisor would be really important, but how does that work?
It's a relatively new program through Silicon Valley Clean Energy. We kind of shorthand refer to it as a concierge, but it's basically where, a homeowner, I think even do they support renters as well? There are some electrification measures that renters could take. But an individual who is interested in electrifying their home can call and get support to understand all the different opportunities associated with that. So, and then I think they get help all the way through the process, which is nice versus.
So it's phone-in support for advice, and then you can continue with the same person or with different people as you run into potential problems.
We can, it is more of like an advisor, but they are looking to roll out, they've started doing it for certain income levels where they can do a direct install program. So they're hoping to ramp that up because they're already doing that in the Peninsula Clean Energy territory where so you've got some choice. You can use your own contractor if you feel comfortable with that person. Or if you just want someone to come in and do it and get your incentives, they're working on having that up and ready. So when you call, they can ask further questions. Would you like someone to come out and do the install or look at, your bills and things like that? And they talk about the e-elect rate as well, how you can save. If you convert all of your appliances, you can get on a lesser electricity rate, so you can save on your utility bill.
It's kind of looking at the whole picture for people. And I like that they're starting with the income qualified folks, but it will be great if they can make it broadly available to have this, even a direct install component. That would really streamline things.
Yeah, because I know
Yeah.
people run into problems, so I'd love to hear more about that as it rolls out.
We're thrilled that they've launched the
Yeah.
program. It's really excellent.
Okay, those are my questions. Any last questions that other members have thought of? Okay, so now we go to, are there any comments from the audience on this item? Daniel, have you handed in a blue card?
I have not had a chance to do that.
Okay, well, why don't you, you can make it out afterwards. Do you want to come up to the podium and speak?
Oh. Hello. Hello, hello, hello. When I think of sustainability, I think of it as environmental sustainability, and I think of it as kind of there's two parts to it. One is the environment, and the other is technology. I see this council working almost wholly on the technology part. And I totally support, going to renewable energy sources and phasing out fossil fuels. And all these programs that are up there are great. This is a really good thing. However, I do have a question about ignoring the other part. The other part is the environment, the natural environment that surrounds us all. And right now, because of, what's happening with all the housing development and the mandates and so forth, the rush to build houses, we are basically doing urban deforestation. And our urban forests are disappearing at a rapid pace. Trees, the forests, the wildlife, the ecosystems, the highway pollution barriers, which are trees that are formed along the highways, which filter and absorb air pollutants and contaminants. And this results, and we know this, to more exposures to environmental contaminants. It also has an impact, of course, on climate change. Our efforts to address climate change. We know that trees take in CO2 through photosynthesis. They exchange that for oxygen. And so when we remove these forests, we are emitting, and especially if they're burned, like in our wildfires, all that CO2 that's in that tree, okay, is now being emitted to the atmosphere. So now they're emitters of CO2. But I'm wondering if the committee can begin considering this as part of, and I see ways to change this to actually preserve, restore, and enhance our urban forests that we're losing quite quickly. And that is an important key part of environmental sustainability. Key. Almost, I would say, a lot of people would argue is equal to the technology solutions. These are existing natural resources that exist here to the benefit of us. And trees do an amazing job at carbon sequestration, right? Of taking in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
So
Thank you.
please make out the blue card,
Mhm.
and we don't do question and answer.
I know.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, are there any other in-person speakers to this item? Any online speakers?
Two, starting with Bruce England.
Thank you. Bruce England, resident on Wisman Station Drive. Three comments. One is, yeah, Daniel raises good points about the tree canopy and the buffers and things like that. I know he cares about that a lot. And it is important to consider there is a tension between the needs for housing, which we all know about, and protecting biodiversity and tree canopy and all of that, and human health. So, I mean, you know all these things, but I just am echoing the points that Daniel's making as being an area of concern and interest. The second of three is, you probably already know this too, is that solar panel installations, home-based solar panel installations are extremely challenging now. This is not just for Mountain View, but all over, and certainly in California. And this is something I personally want to get done on my town. It's doubly challenging, not only the state regulations and the local city regulations, and also my own HOA requirements. It's almost impossible to get done unless you're really dedicated to following the process through. I've been at it for over a year and I still don't have my panels installed. So I'm just raising that as if we want to get more solar panels yet installed in Mountain View on residential rooftops, there's still work to be done there. And lastly, on the e-bikes, probably already know this, and I know that I've brought it up with Whitney and others on staff. This is a bit of a contentious issue. Not everybody, even in the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition, agrees with the implementation of e-bikes, and one e-bike is not necessarily the same as another. And I would rather see a rebate program that covered bikes, traditional bicycles as well. If the goal is to get people out of their vehicles, we should be providing all kinds of means for them to do that, including standard bikes. So I'm not really crazy about the limitations on the current program, and I wish it could be expanded. And I'll just close by saying I'm so glad that we have a sustainability team in the city of Mountain View. That really is a plus, and I hope that that will remain year after year after year in perpetuity. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have another speaker.
Yeah, two more actually now. LMV office.
Hi, sorry, I need to change the name. This is Marnie Lee. I'm a resident of Waverly Park. And I just have a quick question. And I would like to find out more about the block power piece in the presentation. What is that collaboration about? And whether it's about financing opportunity for commercial multifamily building or apartments to decarbonize. I've heard a lot about this organization, and what they do is very exciting to me, and I'm happy to take the answer offline. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we have Gahendra Gurab.
Yeah, hello. I'm Gehendra. My feedbacks also similar to the previous colleagues, especially the current activities seems to be very much focused on mitigation. I think that is good from emission mitigation point of view, but I also like to suggest that we should also focus on adaptation, especially because climate is going to change in the future. And so we have to adapt to the changed climate, and that is very much important for the vulnerable people. So in that direction, I would suggest that education program is not only for the current stakeholders, but also for the future, our children. I think they have to adapt to the future climate. So education for both children and adults is very important. And also economic development, because as you know that the most vulnerable people are those who are also economically behind. I think it is good to run some economic financial development for those vulnerable people. And the third is strengthening the social bonds, because social bond is also a strength for the people to cope, to adapt, to respond to climate change. So some sort of a neighborhood, development or strengthening the neighborhood in to respond to the climate, impacts or risks is also very important. So my suggestion is, in nutshell, we need also to, implement some activities around education, economic development, and social development of the communities for adaptation, efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. No more. So those are all the comments. And just because a number of people although this isn't a question and answer period, a number of people expressed kind of a diversity of things above and beyond what you just presented that they'd like the city or this committee to work on. I'd like people to know that we are doing a lot of those things, not within this committee, but under other things you might look up, find information on the city website, but we have a biodiversity plan, a parks and rec plan, an urban forestry plan, and an economic vitality plan that has workforce development for, as the speaker was saying, vulnerable people. So those the speakers are right, they're all overlapping and pertain to sustainability, but you might want to look not just at this committee, but elsewhere for some of those programs that we're doing. So that said, now it's time for committee members to make any final comments on this item. Do members have any comments? I don't see comments. I'm just going to say one thing. I recently talked to some neighbors about outreach on this. And these are neighbors who don't engage with, they probably don't go to Earth Day and so forth. So they were saying that the things that they would get, and they're not active on social media. So they said that the things that they would get would be either just mailers. So I'm hoping that most people still look at their paper mail. So I'm hoping we'll do that for people who don't go to these other things. Also, people mentioned the farmer's market, the library, and the council neighborhood committee. I think could be, because a lot of people go to those meetings. I think those would all be good resources. So since my neighbors brought those up, I thought I would bring them up here. And I'm glad you're at the building counter, building and planning counter. So with that, if there are no other comments from the committee, we'll move to 5.1 on our agenda, which is the agreement with Cascadia Consulting Group to develop the 2035 climate strategy. And this item will be presented by Sustainability Division staff. Ms. Lee will commence the presentation.
Okay, well, while Ms. Ramos pulls up the presentation, thank you, Chair Hicks. We wanted to spend some time with the committee to talk about an item that we hope will be coming to the full council later this fall. And it's an agreement with Cascadia Consulting to work with the city on developing a broad climate strategy is what we're calling it, really aiming many of our measures at 2035 to look to see how we can go very quickly on both decarbonization and resiliency. Slide. The contract exceeds $250,000, which is why we'll be coming to council. And we're hoping to get feedback from both the committee as well as the community. And ideally a recommendation that this contract be sent to council for consideration. Just by way of a little bit of background, the climate strategy is actually stemming from a couple different sources. First and foremost, it is aligned with our climate goals. The council adopted a resolution to become carbon neutral by 2045 and directed staff to come back with implementation considerations for that. And in more recent discussions with this committee, we got direction to look at going even more quickly and to see about decarbonization by 2035. So we've oriented this climate strategy to be inclusive of decarbonization goals for 2035. Also, within our most recent sustainability action plan that was funded by the council, there was a direction. One of the measures within SAP4 was to develop a climate vulnerability and resiliency plan, and to develop a decarbonization strategy. And as we looked at those two directives, we started to see that there could be some synergies in looking at the issue, because in many ways, both decarbonization and adaptation are two sides of the same coin. You know, how will we, as a city organization and as a community, be responsive to climate change? So we decided to fold both of those elements into a singular strategy, which we're calling the climate strategy. And then finally, of course, as this committee knows, the decarbonization strategy, as well as the vulnerability assessment, were included in the most recent council work plan. We didn't include the resiliency strategy because we thought it would take longer than the time horizon of the council work plan, but it was already kind of earmarked for consideration in future council work plans as well. So we've gotten direction to really be proactive about both decarbonization and resiliency. And we're proposing to look at this issue holistically. I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Anderson. She's going to tell you a little bit more about the selection process for the consultants.
Ms. Lee. So the consultant was selected through a competitive procurement process as summarized on this slide. A request for proposals was issued in March, and we received 6 proposals in response, which were evaluated by a team of staff from the Sustainability and Resiliency Division. We interviewed the top 3 respondents and then conducted reference checks for the top 2. After a thorough analysis, the selection committee selected Cascadia Consulting Group as the most qualified consultant for this project. So the lead consultant is Cascadia, and they're experienced in planning for climate mitigation, adaptation, and many other sustainability topics. Their recent work includes projects to develop climate action plans for over a dozen local agencies, including San Francisco, Albany, Cupertino, Foster City, and San Mateo County. They've also hired a sub-consultant called Interethnica to support development of the strategy, and they specialize in process facilitation, multicultural engagement, and community outreach planning, and they have extensive experience engaging frontline and disadvantaged communities.
So to give you a broad overview, at the end of our process, the climate strategy, we hope will help us identify actions that are needed to meet the city's decarbonization and resiliency goals. We will be working with this committee to confirm the way we want to prioritize. You know, how will we decide what to do first? So we'll be coming back to all of you to talk through, you know, do we look at impact, you know, ability to reduce emissions or to build resiliency in the community? How do we factor in equity considerations for the community and serve those that have been traditionally underserved? do we look at other unintended consequences, or can we look at synergies? Are there measures or strategies that address both of our goals, or even other goals? You know, for example, within the biodiversity plan or Park and Rec strategic plan, there may be strategies that are identified that offer multiple benefits, and so would we use that as one of our prioritization criteria? At the end of the day, what we'd like is a plan that gives us a broad overview of how we'll get to decarbonization by 2035. This is the how. How will we do it? What are the steps that we can take? And then it will also have a shorter term, maybe more of a 5-year window menu of kind of, these are the things that we ought to consider doing first. We've planned it this way because we anticipate that things change. You know, plans inherently almost are stale as soon as you're done with them. And so we want to build a plan that is flexible, that gives us some long-term vision, and then more concrete short-term guidance, with the expectation that we will likely have to update it over time because the legislative context will change. You know, the federal government may take action, or, you know, things that will happen at the state or local level. You know, if you think about since our last plan was adopted, the state has announced that it won't allow the sale of non-electric passenger vehicles by 2035. It's looking at banning, you know, regionally, we're looking at banning natural gas appliances. The federal government released the Inflation Reduction Act. So many things have happened. And so our considerations of what we as a city should do naturally would have changed since some of those initial plans take place. So we're going to be building this plan. We'll have more short-term strategies, and then this still a longer term view on things, but the expectation that it would be flexible. In terms of the scope of work, what we're trying to do is something a little bit different. You probably, if you've perused other plans that some of the consultants have done, or if you've just been familiar with what other jurisdictions have done, most often, resiliency, well, more work has been done on the decarbonization front. Many cities have carbon neutrality plans, decarbonization plans, climate action plans. And we kind of do know a lot of the major things. You know, we want to decarbonize our buildings and our transportation. So there is going to be work in that space. But the other piece of what we're trying to do, which is to really think about adaptation and climate resilience, how will our environment change over time? Even if we were to stop all emissions today, we do know that we're already experiencing some aspects of climate change. Every year is the hottest year on record, right? We keep having 100-year storms all the time. So something is happening already. And how can we as a community be prepared? So we're going to start our work with, you know, of course, outreach and engagement will be a focus, and that will actually thread throughout the entirety of the project. And different kinds of outreach will happen at different phases. But then we're going to start on this climate vulnerability assessment. As I mentioned, it was one of the directives of SAP 4, and as well, it was included in the council work plan. But this is to understand, you know, we know it's getting hotter. We know storms are becoming more intense, but what does that really look like for Mountain View? What parts of the community might be more subject to extreme heat events? Where might parts of the community flood, in addition to our kind of understanding of the sea level rise impacts? So this vulnerability assessment is to really take the best climate science that we have now and to look, you know, in our community, what might that look like? Maybe today we have 8 on average heat events a year, or 5. And in the future, by 2050, perhaps that number is 10 to 15. So, you know, what operationally might we need to change in terms of how we provide services to the city? What infrastructure might be useful? Is it planting more trees? Is it building out cooling centers? Maybe both of those things, you know. So once we understand what the climate risks are, then we will be able to better plan for them. We still will do greenhouse gas emissions analysis. Ms. Anderson will tell you a little bit more about what that might look like. And then we'll take all of this understanding, all of this assessment of, what can we do to reduce emissions and what are some of the climate impacts that we see coming. And we'll be developing a suite of strategies that address one or ideally both of those priority areas. And then the consultant will work with us to kind of finalize this draft strategy. Will include coming back to this committee and to also having a study session with council about it. And then we'll have, at the very end, the consultant will also be available for on-call services as we actually move towards implementation. Next slide. I mentioned that the community engagement would be throughout the process, and this is because we need different kinds of feedback from the community. Both in terms of on the decarbonization side, we've had lots of community conversation. We've had multiple environmental sustainability task forces that helped to inform very robust sustainability action plans, 4 of them, each with 50 to 100 measures in them. So a lot of feedback about what specifically could be done around decarbonization. But we have not yet had the opportunity to have that level of discussion with the community about climate vulnerability and adaptation. So what is the community's experience with extreme climate events? Last summer, for example, we surveyed seniors who were coming to have lunch at the senior center about their experience with recent heat events. And I think nearly half of them didn't know about the cooling resources that were available in the community. So, building awareness and education, understanding what was their experience through power outages, more severe storms, heat events. How do these climate events affect our more vulnerable populations? We'll be doing similar outreach with, for example, folks who are maybe vehicularly housed, these heat resiliency toolkits that we'll be distributing. We got some feedback from Community Services Agency about what their clients' experiences were through heat events. So some of the community engagement will be to understand how climate events will impact our most vulnerable. Then, we'll be gathering all of this information about what we expect to see and what we can do. And we'll come back to the community to get feedback on, the plan, the strategy. Does this make sense? Does this reflect the pain points that you've experienced in climate events? Does this, reflect your priorities as a community around decarbonization, how we can get there most quickly? Before we come back to council, we want to make sure that we can assure all of you that we are really deeply engaging with the community to understand both their needs and priorities. So the community engagement will look different over the course of the project. It's fine. We can go to the next one. It's okay.
The climate strategy will identify additional strategies to accelerate the city's decarbonization progress, but it'll build upon, significant progress we've already made. So one of the planned tasks in the scope is to conduct wedge analysis. These basically lay out how we can decarbonize. They take into account emissions reductions from the regional, state, and federal government, as well as local programs, so that we can really focus in on where can we make the most impact locally. This slide shows an example wedge analysis conducted by Cascadia for another jurisdiction, just as an example. Pass it back to Ms. Lee.
Yeah, and I mentioned already a little bit about how we would be conducting community engagement and this vulnerability assessment around climate impacts. And we'll be looking at things such as increasing storm frequency and severity. We've had bigger and bigger storms, these atmospheric rivers. How can we start to get our hands around what that will look like in the future? Extreme heat events. We talked about, the city has been really a leader in sea level rise and flooding, and we have this robust capital improvement plan already laid out for strategies around sea level rise. We expect that this climate strategy would really just try to include the good work that Public Works has already done on this front. I don't anticipate that we would do a lot of modeling because they've had their engineers go all the way down in the weeds on this particular issue. But then there's also air quality, as we've had increasing frequency of fires. Some years we do fine, and other years there have been many bad air quality days. And how do we respond? Drought, and then another element that we'll be looking at is social vulnerability. So we'll be mapping out these climate impacts across the city. And then we'll also have social vulnerability mapped across the city. So we can see where there are instances where the climate impact is most severe in areas where we have a higher percentage of socially vulnerable residents, so that we know where the climate impacts will be most severely felt in the community. So this cross-sector analysis will help us to develop resiliency strategies. Once we understand what the climate picture will look like, then we can start to understand what we can do in response. How can we build resiliency in the community? And it's not just hard infrastructure. You know, the sea level rise work, I think, lends itself to kind of thinking about like, well, we'll restore a wetland or we'll build some gray infrastructure, but it will also contain things like social cohesion. I think one of the earlier comments mentioned that as a crucial strategy, and that is true. Resilience is both a tangible and an intangible thing. So as we think about community engagement, even the Cool Block program, a lot of that is actually a community building exercise. How do we get neighbors to know each other and then know about each other's vulnerabilities? If everybody knew that on their block, you know, Mr. Smith or Miss Lee, who lives down the street, lives alone, and I might just check on them because I know it's going to be really hot tomorrow. And, you know, what will they do? Like, do they have air conditioning at home? So just this idea that people might know their neighbors and that there's this cohesion socially that actually leads to resilience. So the resiliency strategies will really span a variety of areas, both, you know, plant trees and the lead up to the cooling centers, and then it can be things like building community. Right. We expect this to be an ongoing conversation. What we don't want is to get a contract, execute it, and then come back with the final plan in 18 months. We would really like to work with the committee and then also the full council all along the way. We, of course, we're here today bringing a discussion about the scope of work. We hope to go to council with contract execution later this year. And then our next steps will be to talk with CSC about the engagement strategy that the engagement plan that we'll be developing. We'll be presenting the draft vulnerability assessment. So you can see, here's what we're looking at, what we're finding from our analysis of the data. We'll also want to be in discussion with all of you about how do we rank all of the strategies as we develop them? How do we make sure that we prioritize them in a way that makes sense for our community? We'll also be bringing back our community engagement results and the draft climate strategy. Then we'll be holding a study session with council to look at the draft climate strategy. Once CSC recommends that council consider it, and then we'll bring it to council for final adoption. We will also be happy to make space for an additional meeting with CSC after council sees the draft climate strategy, if that's the direction of council. So we've left enough room in there to accommodate that, depending on the feedback. So that's just our plan for how to engage both CSC and the full council throughout the process. And then we're on to discussion questions. We just have 3 for you today, recognizing that this discussion is largely focused on the scope of work, but we also have a few questions, one question about some of the very initial steps of the contract once we execute it. The first question is, does CSC have any feedback on the overall proposed scope of work for the climate strategy?
So do you want us, I didn't realize you had a number of questions. If,
Right, maybe would it be easier if I read through all three of the questions and
Yeah,
then,
maybe
okay,
we
great.
do that.
Okay, so that's the first question. Question two,
Yeah.
does CSC have any initial
Okay.
feedback or recommendations before staff and the consulting team even start the work of developing the community engagement plan? So what are the ways that you'd like us to consider engaging the community? And then finally, does CSC have any feedback on the anticipated council and CSC meetings to discuss the strategy, kind of that timeline that I laid out? Is that the right level of engagement for all of you? To make sure that you're well informed and really giving guidance along the way.
Okay, my apologies. I have read those questions.
That's fine.
They were in the staff report.
Yes.
They're the same questions.
They are, yes.
So that said, now it's time for council members, committee members to ask any questions on this item that they might have. And then after that, we're going to take comments from the audience, so the audience can become prepared now. So are there any questions that committee members have on this item? Mr. Showalter?
Yeah, could you go over again what the goal of this study is?
Yeah, can you go back to the overview slide of the climate strategy? Yeah, I mean, in short, the city has adopted many climate goals and also has done a lot of work in other areas that overlap into sustainability. So we'd like for this to be an overarching, kind of an organizing framework for how we will achieve our decarbonization and resiliency goals. Both decarbonizing by 2035. I think resiliency by I don't want to commit us to being fully resilient by 2035. It's a longer process, but it will lay out strategies for how the city can also begin to address resiliency in the community. So it will pull in other commitments that we've made through other policies and plans that the city has adopted. And then make sure that we're all aligned towards this singular goal of decarbonization by 2035. And then establishing resiliency goals for the city. I don't think we formally have established resiliency goals. We haven't adopted as many policies and plans aside from the sea level rise work, which we have been really out in front on, which is impressive.
Well, really, the resiliency concepts have kind of hit us in the face in the last 5 years.
Right.
They haven't been something that people have been working on for a while.
It's a much newer field.
That's a much newer field. Okay. All right. Well, so I'm going to sort of pare it back what I think.
Okay.
So what you want to do is you want to consolidate all of the work that the city is doing on sustainability and resilience into kind of a single study and package and evaluate it at once. So you can move forward on how we would reach a carbon neutrality goal by 2035. Plus, this includes resilience. Okay, so this sort of assumes that we can, so you are assuming that we can reach carbon neutrality by 2035.
Right. And we've been calling it decarbonization, which is very similar to carbon neutrality, but it focuses the work on the actual decarbonization. There is always going to be a small residual
Right.
of emissions that we
Right.
can't address. And so carbon neutrality commits us to offsetting or sequestering those remaining emissions.
Right.
We're not foreclosing that, but the decision on that, we're just orienting toward the work of decarbonization first. And I think as we develop the strategy, we can look at whether we call it carbon neutrality or call it decarbonization. But we want the real analysis to be on the decarbonization part of that. But otherwise, yes, exactly that.
Okay, because there was at times a question of whether this was really something we could do.
Right.
And it seems like you've kind of turned the corner on that. And so that's why I'm explicitly asking that question. You feel like this is a doable thing. Well, you
Well,
need to figure out how to do it, but you think that this is a doable thing. Okay, that's my question.
So, Councilmember Abington, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. So I guess I'm trying to decide or, so I think my concern is, time. And I look at all the plans that we have, and I guess my question is, have we done an analysis of how far we've, advanced in all of these, plans that we have?
right.
I appreciate the idea of consolidation, but when we look at another 18 months and, $500,000, to me, it's like, plans are great, but the implementation is more important. And given we have so much already, I guess I'm questioning what do you call it, the return on investment
Sure.
or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's a completely fair question. We have provided periodic updates on Sustainability Action Plan 4, which is, I think, the most current, if you will, plan. And we were actually talking about the next CSC meeting to allocate time for another update for all of you to show you kind of where we've come. We also do the annual GHG emissions inventory, which is the real measurement that at the end of the day, we try to hold ourselves to. What this plan does contain, which we haven't really made as much headway in, is thinking about resiliency. We don't really have plans that model out what our extreme heat risk might be in the future, or inland flooding, air quality events. So what will we do on the adaptation front? We don't have this many plans, and so I can certainly share the sea level rise progress, which has been substantial, but everything else has been, I think, responsive more than planned and proactive.
I guess that's where, because I'm on, for instance, your district board, right, we talk about wildfires and air quality and, I think that's, the result was the cooling station idea, idea and the funding for that. So I guess that's my question is, how much of this do we need to, do versus there's other plans out there that we should just be looking at implementing, in our little world, realizing we're just a part of the bigger picture. And I guess my question, and then it's with some of these plans we already have, for instance, the strategic pathways through 2030. Here we are, 2025. My question is, how far have we gotten through, and with these strategies? Like, have we completed all plans? I don't know if that's part of this analysis, but I think that's my concern is, I've been here a long time and I've seen plans and, we spend time doing the plans and then they just kind of sit for a while. And then when we start thinking about it, then it's time to redo the plan and we don't get that far. And I know we've done a lot, but that's my concern. I guess I'm trying to weigh.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the reasons that we tried to switch the order on the agenda was to underscore, we haven't been it's not that we are waiting to do any of the work as we do the planning. So I certainly want to reassure you that we're going full steam ahead, especially on the decarbonization front, because we've had significant input and plans that are funded. So we're implementing those and we're doing many of the things. But actually the context has changed since our last plan, like I was saying, the inflation reduction. So we've been in discussions with Public Works. How do we maximize the drawdown on the Inflation Reduction Act for our municipal facilities? How can we start to build out the EV charging that we know we'll need now that the state has changed its mandates around EV sales? So we are doing a lot of this work. We just installed 50 or 60 EV chargers. So we're doing work as we go. We know that there are certain things that we need to do. And we know that it's important to occasionally take a step back and look at the big picture and make sure. So we can bring the report out. We've actually made quite a lot of progress. We've implemented many programs. The establishment of our team, there were positions in other departments that were established. Municipal buildings are being electrified as we speak. We have a fleet electrification plan that is being reviewed by Public Works right now. And we're starting to talk with departments about switching to electric vehicles. So there's a lot that's underway, which is really exciting. But when it comes to adaptation and then the things that we might do, it's hard. Now, I think your comment about like federal and state players, regional players have already taken action, and especially on adaptation, but also in decarbonization, really. Like we could just say like, well, CARB has banned gas appliances, so we can just wait. But I think we would like to go faster, and Mountain View has always been a leader. And I think on resiliency as well, the fact that there was direction to actually develop a resiliency plan, many communities don't have one. And it's really just, I think, a kind of a mirror of the early work that the city did on decarbonization. Again, the city is coming out early on resiliency. I think in 5 years, many jurisdictions will be working on developing these plans. There are mandates actually for sea level rise plans. BCDC is putting out. So state agencies are starting to say, no, not only do you need to do climate action plans, but you need to have resiliency plans. So we're just kind of reading the tea leaves and saying, we know we're going to have to do this work, and it's important to do the work. There are things that we can do at the local level, you know, maybe in the same way we have reach codes for our buildings in our own community, we could have reach codes around resiliency. We could require cooling or air filtration so that our building stock is more resilient. Any buildings in the flood zone could have flood proofing requirements. So there are things that we could do at a very local level. We can have resiliency hubs that are built out before a regional entity would provide that. We could look at doing that. You know, we're going to be replacing the HVAC at the gymnasiums. If we do an all electric system, then there'll be cooling. You've just approved solar to go on those gymnasiums. Then we'll look for grant money to put batteries, and then we may have 2 resiliency hubs in our community. So finding those kinds of opportunities, I think the vulnerability assessment and then the planning for it will help us to identify some of those things too, that we can do very locally that might not happen otherwise.
I guess that's my concern is, you know, we are often reminded of staff overwork, overload. And I don't, you know, that's my concern is like, you can do this, but it's gonna pull from the staff we have unless we're looking at hiring more staff, which I don't think we have the capacity to do at this economic time. So that's my concern is like, I don't want us to, you know, come to a halt to do this plan. I just want to make sure that we keep going. So
Yeah, absolutely.
guarantee that, I guess.
Yeah, and we don't want that either. So these work groups, we've just been in discussions with Public Works, for example, and now we have just an informal agreement that anytime an appliance is approaching end of life, that we'll be replacing it with an electric appliance. And then those gymnasiums, you know, these larger systems, HVAC systems, we've already started working groups like, okay, well, let's plan for an all electric replacement. And it will take a few years, but we're starting that work. We just met last week. So we'll be engaging with the schools and, you know, there's a lot that needs to be done and lead up to that. But rather than wait till the system dies, we're trying to be more proactive to make sure that we can get an all electric system in. So, and it will be actually a resiliency strategy plus a decarbonization one, because we'll be putting in heat pumps. So
Yeah, so I really want us to keep doing that.
Absolutely.
That's my concern though, is we do go and engage in another planning process, and that's just more work for you all, right? So when you have to, you know, decide which, and then what we're doing gets put on the back burner to get a plan done. So for me, that's my concern is like, rather than planning, because, you know, I've spent many years planning and then some years implementing, but I think we really need to implement, to move the needle, so.
Right.
So sorry, that's commentary, question commentary, but.
We agree fully. I mean, I think hopefully the programs that are being launched, almost at breakneck speed, like we like personally the balance of being able to do planning and actual program implementation. So we're not going to stop implementing programs to do this plan.
And if I may too, I mean, part of it is, you know, we're not trying to have like a super robust technical plan. It's kind of like just give us a guide of where we should focus our energy. Because if we are being more aggressive by going to 2035, that's a shift from the 2045 goal. So while we're integrating plans, we're trying to figure out which things are the most important to do, which things are maybe less important to do. And even for resiliency, I think there's a lot of policies or programs that we just haven't quite thought through yet. You know, a good example is like, we're gonna have these cooling centers, but how are people who don't have vehicles or anything, how are they gonna get there? Are they gonna walk in the hot sun, potentially get dehydrated? You know, so it's just trying to figure out what kind of services or how do we offer support during those times. And we haven't all quite thought through all those little nuances, but they're important.
It ends up with better program implementation. Right now, we can kind of like grab at like, okay, I had a conversation with the urban forestry manager and I said, these are some of the resiliency hub locations that we're imagining. Maybe plant some trees on the roads that lead to them, but if we had a strategy that just really outlined that as a specific thing, that we would integrate our urban forestry efforts with our resiliency hub efforts to make sure that community could access the resiliency hubs, it would be more efficient. So if we just identify that and then all agree that that's what we want to do, it actually leads to better implementation.
More questions or? Okay, so, so I'll say, I guess as an overall comment that my questions are grounded, and actually my questions are pretty similar to the things that both the other members have brought up. And I guess I'll start by saying last night I was in the Council Transportation Committee and we were going over a plan and the committee members had some similar comments and we tweaked it in a way I thought was good. So I hope we're going to have that same kind of conversation. It sounds like our questions are going to be on the same, kind of the same theme. So my theme is that for my questions is that I think this is kind of what Councilmember Showalter brought up. When I read the staff report, I was kind of surprised because I thought decarbonization by 2035 was an ambitious goal and that we were hiring the consultant because we didn't know how to get there. But then when I read the scope of services, it was mostly not about that. The bulk of the money was on interviewing people about vulnerabilities. And I was just surprised. That's not what I expected. That's not what I thought we had directed. And so, and to me, I loved your assurance, the work you're doing and your assurances to the mayor that we know how to get there by 2035, but I don't feel quite as sure as you do. Because when I see people, I think a large part of what we're going to be doing is electrifying buildings. You know, there like other committees and projects I mean, we'll do some of the charging stations and so forth, but I think buildings are the big thing we're focusing on. And when I follow people trying to do that now, we seem along, it's difficult. Whether I look at carbon-free Mountain View and the people who are trying to do that and, you know, their chat group trying to do that and they're very dedicated people and they're having trouble implementing it. Like Mr. England said, he spent a year trying to get solar on his roof. And my own family, we've had those kind of problems too. My husband had no idea what I was doing, but that's a part of the problem that we did something very easy and it took us forever. So, but that's part of the problem, like a lack of outreach and education. And I feel like I thought it was gonna be more focused on that. So one of my questions is, the bulk of the money, it seemed to be spent on interviewing community members. And the group that was chosen focuses on vulnerable communities. But how much are we going to talk to, but the bulk of the decarbonization work, I think because we don't have a federal government that's is planning a track for doing this, we're all doing it ourselves, and we're doing it if we have money, plus a little handout here and there. So it seems like we have to engage with those people and see why they are not able to put solar on the roof, or why is the engagement only going to be with vulnerable communities, or is it going to be with the communities that we're trying to get to do the decarbonization because they have the money to do it?
It would be with both. I mean, I think that there is some level of focus on vulnerable communities when it comes to climate impacts, because they're more acutely felt, right? So if somebody doesn't have cooling in their home, or they don't have access to a vehicle, or they're outdoor workers, right? For example, folks at the Day Worker Center who are doing landscaping jobs, they're going to be more vulnerable to extreme climate events. So there is some focus, especially on the vulnerability side of the community engagement. It would have a little bit more focus on vulnerable populations. It's a vulnerability analysis. On the other hand, we do also anticipate using as a funding source funds that we got from SVCE to do community engagement around decarbonization. How do we talk to the community about decarbonization? What are some of the barriers that folks have experienced? So there will be broad kind of community-wide, if you will, engagement also that's part of it.
So what
Cascadia
portion of the money will be spent on engaging with people we're trying to get to do the decarbonization? And what portion will be spent on engaging with vulnerable communities?
Well, I know that we received a grant from SVCE for $40,000. Is that right, Whitney?
The portion going to for this around that.
Approximately $40,000 we have allocated in funding that we've received. So that would be for decarbonization, community outreach and engagement.
I would just say too that, we already have a budget for outreach, and kind of so there's the part where it's the community engagement for the plan, but then our ongoing outreach, as who's our outreach specialist, goes out and talks to folks at tabling events. We go through issues where people do have barriers, or they're having issues with their electricity rate, and we talk them through that, or they email us. We get quite a bit of emails about, hey, I'm having a problem here. Like, can you help me, move through it? And so that doesn't go away. Like, that's still going to continue throughout our process of developing this plan, is to still continue to remove the barriers or information or provide education to those who are experiencing difficulties or challenges in electrifying.
Yeah, I think we should make the point that we have an analyst that's focused on outreach engagement, and we want to be doing some of that work in-house, because it's a lot about building longer term relationships within the community. So Whitney's position, it's a permanent position, and we plan to be doing outreach and community engagement well past the development of this strategy. This strategy is only funding community engagement to help inform the development of the climate strategy, but we will be doing ongoing community engagement.
So am I understanding, are you saying that the money, and I think it was $100,000, I wrote it down, but I wrote a lot down. That the money that's in this plan for community engagement is all with vulnerable communities, because the engagement with people who are decarbonizing is outside of, you have other grants and it's outside of it.
It's not all and none, but it is more.
Most of this will be engagement with vulnerable populations.
Right,
That's what it said in the scope of work.
right. And
process.
then because we already have an ongoing budget and positions allocated to ongoing outreach and engagement. And as you could see from our programs, much of that work has been really targeting decarbonization and getting to mass adoption of decarbonization strategies. So the Cool Block program is all about electrifying people's homes, the Block Power program, the 2 program associates that we're hiring to help with Cool Block, and then we have Whitney's helping with the Cool Block, the Block Power, no, Denise is helping with the Block Power program. Also, Denise is our analyst that's dedicated to electrification, so, which is really, I mean, maybe we should start calling you the decarbonization analyst. So we have dedicated staffing to outreach and engagement and to decarbonization initiatives already in place, and that's why so much of what we've been updating you on is the work, the headway, the great progress that we've been making on that front. Many of the things within SAP4 were aimed at decarbonization.
So I'll ask another question. So I'm trying to figure out, it's a lot of money for reaching out to vulnerable populations, and it also said to pay people to engage with it. I have a little fear that it's creating work that and creating projects that the council was not really expecting, and I don't want to and that maybe we can't even deliver. And I don't want to overpromise, ask people what they want, and then it's something we never intended to give them and can't give them because we don't have the money to give them. So that's and frankly, I think vulnerable populations, I mean, I talk to people who are pretty vulnerable. My kids went to Castro School where 3/4 of the families were on free and reduced price lunch. There are people I have talked to since kindergarten, 20 years. Mostly what they want is housing. And we're doing the best we can with that. And we're doing a homeless strategy as well. And I'm wondering how much, I think most people, if you ask them, do you want housing or us to build an apartment building or a cooling center? People I've spoken to will want the apartment building.
Right.
So I don't kind of want to add additional projects. I want to do the basic projects, which are pretty hard to accomplish. So, big housing about not being valid. So I guess that's my question. What kind of projects we spend? I don't remember what it is, $100,000 or $200,000 paying people to talk about their climate vulnerabilities. What do we end up promising them? What are the possible outcomes, and are we over promising?
It's a good question.
It is a good question. I think achieving, I think it will be very interesting to have conversation about what should our resiliency goals be. The first phase, I think, of the community engagement will really be understanding what people's vulnerabilities are. So how did they experience heat events? How did they experience some of the more extreme storms? When we had the air quality events and we were told to stay indoors, so what was the experience for folks who didn't have as many, for example, I live in San Francisco. I took my children to the Academy of Sciences when we had those shelter. That's not a strategy that's accessible to everybody in the community. Happen to have a membership, and so we're like, we're going to go into the rainforest dome. There's clean air in there, but that's not actually something that the full population could do. So understanding their experience of some of the climate events that we've already had, we've had extreme storms, we've had air quality days, we've had extreme heat events. So understanding how those impact our most vulnerable is the first part. And then we would regroup and actually come back to the committee and tell you some of the results of the engagement, and then start to think about what strategies make sense, what strategies are attainable for the community, for the city to pursue. What can we pursue in partnership with others. You know, we talk a lot with the county, with other entities, you know, BCDC about sea level rise, of course, even sea level rise, the issue of sea level rise. We can't solve it by ourselves. Right, so we expect that many of the climate resiliency strategies would be focused on collaborating with the public health department, with the county Department of Housing. You know, there are many other entities that we would partner with. And then we would have discussions, you know, before we develop these strategies, what should our goals be around resiliency? Do we want to make sure that we can continue to deliver municipal services? So make sure that we have good continuity of operations for our PD. You know, they mentioned that they get more call volume on heat events because during the day, people are isolating, and then the evenings, they all come out and they're congregating more. So we have more calls to 911. So even a very simple, like looking at our own operations and what are the things that we can adjust or plan for better if we know more about what to expect. Maybe that could be the level of resiliency goal that we can continue to provide. So we can keep the library open. You know, we had to close it the other day during one of our heat events because the HVAC system, right? So knowing that we're going to have more heat events and it might strain that system more, can we plan with Public Works to make sure that that can be operated and the library can stay open? So those are, we could have resiliency goals like that.
Okay, well, so I have additional comments. I think I can save them for comments, not questions. I have comments about timing of all of this. But I think now it's time to move into public comments. So, are there any comments from the audience on this item? We'll go first with in-person speakers. And I see, so please hand in your blue cards. And I recognize Bruce Carney.
Thanks. I'm going to try to tell you everything I've learned in 16 years of working on this problem in 3 minutes. The first thing is that the two critical constraints for decarbonization are time and money. And the amount of money is very, very large. The amount of time is very, very short. So to my mind, prioritization of the decarbonization needs to come ahead of any of the resiliency work. I would hope that by the budget time next spring, that staff would have an estimate, a rough estimate of the amount of money that needs to be spent by the city, the county, SVCE, but more importantly, by building owners in Mountain View to achieve decarbonization by whatever year you want to achieve it by. I personally don't think that 2035 is achievable. When you look at the financial numbers, you will understand why I believe that. But let's imagine that there is a time when Mountain View is decarbonized. One of the things that will have to happen is there will not be pressurized natural gas under our streets because natural gas leaks and it's a potent greenhouse gas. So we need to get to no gas in Mountain View by the end date, whatever date that is. It's a big lift. It means that every appliance in Mountain View that burns gas today needs to be replaced by something else. And that's going to put huge demands on city staff and the building department, the permit department. Since half of our residents don't live in a building that they own, it means that we're going to have to require things of landlords that have never been required before. And I would like to make sure you're all aware of the one and only audacious approach to solving this problem that I'm aware of, which is the Berkeley ballot issue, which will be on their ballot in November. It is super audacious. They're going to proposing to put a tax of 150% on natural gas in buildings of 15,000 square feet or larger. And that tax will go up by 6% plus inflation every year. They're going to use that money, which they expect to be $27 million, which in Mountain View scale would probably be about $15 million a year, or at least in year one, to decarbonize low-income apartments and low-income single-family homes. That's the kind of crank on the money wheel that is going to be necessary. And so if you're not ready to sign up for something like that, don't pretend that you're going to be solving this big problem. But I hope you will. I hope you'll find an even better way to crank the money wheel because time is not good, time is not on our side. Thanks.
Thank you. Daniel?
We do know that urban forests are very important for decarbonization. In our cities, in our state, nationwide, on our planet. And by housing developments removing urban forestry for development, we're building more units. That creates a problem because that is totally antithetical to our goals for sustainability and to decarbonization. The more forest we remove, the more work we have to do to replace that. We have something that already exists right now. In the beginning, in the first place, we have existing urban forests that can be preserved. And we have to get in our heads this notion that we're led to believe that housing and nature are mutually exclusive, and that is just not true. And one of the problems has been some of the policies in our housing, city housing development policy and programs that don't necessarily prevent urban deforestation. The policies could be changed to do more to protect the urban forests. For example, we could require developers to consider the integration of the urban forests on their private lands. In integrating those urban forests with the project footprint in the early stages. And that would be kind of promoted and move forward with community early engagement process, where people would say, look, we want to save this forest. We want you to consider this in your early designs. Right now, when we get these projects in our community meetings, a lot of the money has already been invested. Okay, a lot of the time hasn't been invested. By that time, they're fully committed to the plan that they're proposing to the public. That's not the time to get input from the public. It's during even, I would say, the conceptual phase of the project. That may be kind of a tough thing to do, but at least in the early planning stages, we could find solutions this way by integrating and not replacing, in our mind, when we review these plans, we think about integrating, we think about replacing things with other things, like replacing part of the forest with artificial landscaping, things like that. None of that has the benefit, not nearly the benefit of a natural ecosystem, of a natural forest, natural trees, plants. These are extremely important. And I like your idea, what you said about, collaborating with these other departments. They need to know what's important as far as sustainability when forestry is developing their urban forestry and biodiversity plan.
Thank you,
That needs
Daniel.
that
Your
collaboration.
time is up. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks.
Are there online?
Yeah, we have two, starting with Dehendra Gurung.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing this plan for strategy development. Yeah, I agree with the previous colleagues. I looked at the vulnerability assessment components, the elements, but I did not clearly see the biodiversity vulnerability because we have also to assess the biodiversity, whether they will, cope or withstand the climate in the next maybe 20 years, 30 years. Or there will be any new, species will be coming as invasive species. So I think we need to also assess those biodiversity vulnerability. So based on that, it is not only we conserve now, but the forest we conserve now, will they, sustain in the future climate? So that we need to assess. The second thing is, I think it has also been discussed that the capacity. Yes, we'll develop our strategy, but will we have the capacity? Capacity in terms of our regulation. Are the existing regulations or ordinance or codes, are efficient or sufficient, to deliver the strategy? So we need to assess our the law, regulation, and ordinance. So based on that assessment, maybe we will be able to design to develop a new rules and regulation, and that is also equally applicable for the institution. What kinds of institution will we be requiring, when we are going to deliver our new strategy? So maybe the institutional assessment will also be required during this strategy development process. And on top of that, definitely the funding, how much we'll need and what will be the sources of our funding when we, come into the stage of delivery of the strategy. Thank you. Those are my comments.
Thank you. And we have another member of the public.
Yes, I can't see their full name, but BNAEG.
Bruce Nagel.
Bruce, are you there? Bruce Nagel?
I didn't see that on mute. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I want to emphasize some of the points that have been made already that are important. The first is that we should be looking at the natural solutions. I think the ones that come to mind, which were touched on, but worth mentioning again, is the fact that we need to do things like restore swamps and other things that reduce the amount of water flow without necessarily building larger dikes or larger fences that are going to be a problem. So combining this with natural solutions is an important issue from it, and it should be a consideration in any new process or new building we put up there. Second thing is that I want to talk about the fact that there's a real need to make sure that we measure things properly and we know what's going on. It's been hinted at, but I think what we should do is do something that makes sure that as we release things, that we've got the milestones over a period of time to know when this is supposed to happen. There was a lot more detail in this presentation than I saw in the written information in terms of, measuring this and making sure that we're validating we're on track. So I think that's becomes an important issue. One of the other important things that Bruce Carney brought up, which I've completely agree with him, which is the audacious plan that Berkeley has put out. And what they're doing is they're saying that they're going to tax the amount of gas used by large buildings and then redirect those funds to being able to make the buildings more sustainable in Berkeley. And this is really exciting because of a couple of things. The first of which is it gets rid of some of the challenges we had in the past about the courts blocking things. It's unlikely the courts would block this plan because it doesn't really, it bypasses them. So I think we need to look at that and look at audacious solutions and try to figure out how to get there. And I thank you for your time. And I think the other thing is we'll need to go through all the detail that came through this meeting and review it at some point, because there's a lot of things that were discussed during this meeting that weren't available before this meeting. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there other commentaries?
Yeah, one last, Bruce England.
Hi, thank you. Bruce England, resident in Wisman Station Drive. So several comments. I like the documentation that we got to review tonight, and pretty much echo everything that's been said by the other commenters. I want to point out a few things. So none of this happens in a vacuum, of course. So all of the interconnected impacts and solutions and collaboration across city teams and coordination across projects are going to be essential through this. That's sometimes been a problem through city work. And so I look forward to seeing improvements there, as there has been in some of the other plans. So Mountain View has its own unique character, of course, based on our history and inherent diversity. And so what we do here might not be exactly what would be done even in neighboring communities. So looking at Mountain View as its own place will be important too. As discussed in the Council Transportation Committee meeting last night related to the active transportation plan, Mountain View should endeavor to be a regional leader through this work. So Berkeley has been mentioned a couple of times, and we know that we're at a crossroads now between Mountain View's past and going towards urbanization and densification for a variety of reasons. And as we make that switch, which we're in the midst of right now, it's going to be important how we go about doing that and doing it mindfully. Few other short comments. So the plan that you're looking at tonight is very human focused, and I would like to see more coverage for non-human animals, biodiversity, trees, landscaping, migration routes, wildlife habitat, wildlife corridors, and so on. And I was a little confused when I went through it to see some plans called out in one place and not in another place. The ones that are super important, I think, are the biodiversity strategy and urban forest plan and the active transportation plan. They're brought up, but not in every location in the documentation, and maybe just centralizing that information would be helpful. There are multifaceted benefits. What's good for tackling climate protection can have other benefits, at least worth mentioning, and vice versa. Think of green complete streets, which enhances biodiversity and cools our roadways and sidewalks, and helps to encourage people to leave their vehicles parked. And a dark skies ordinance, which can help protect wildlife and reduce energy consumption. The impervious surfaces and what can be done there around stormwater management and reducing heat island effects, that's all really good. Residential rooftop solar, I brought that up before. What we can do to help encourage that and make that work would be great. And I'm interested about contamination impacts as a result of major disaster events like earthquakes. Some communities have been really hit by that when those things happen. I didn't see that mentioned in here. Some of the community groups, I'd like to hear more about which community groups will be included in the focus groups and outreach. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more speakers? Okay, so now we bring this back to the committee. We can address the three questions, have general discussion, and make any motions necessary. Somebody like to start?
Sure, I'll start. I have to say, I too was quite surprised when I read this, because my understanding of the direction from council had been that the question was whether or not we really could, that it was a reasonable expectation for us to get to carbon neutrality or decarbonization, whatever we want to call it. This big change in the end of our goal period. That's what it was, from 45 to 35. Was this reasonable? And I remember us discussing that although some other communities had just jumped on board with that, we didn't want to do that unless we saw a clear path forward. And so I thought that this project was to define that clear path forward. That was really the project. And I think that it is, that's part of it, but it's a lot more than that. And I'm not necessarily opposed to that, but I just always think it's important to kind of keep the sort of administrative record clear on, how we get someplace and where we're going. So for me, that was really the direction from council. And you've gone beyond that, and that's not necessarily a problem, but it's different. So I want to register that. I was a little taken aback when I read all of this information about the engagement plan, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. It did not seem to me that was designed to meet the goal of figuring out whether we get to carbon neutrality by 2035 or not. But, you know, the additional goal of developing a resilience plan, it's more in line with that. That said, I do feel like the order is a little, or perhaps I don't understand the magnitude of how the work on the outreach would go. I mean, $200,000 is almost half of this project. It's a lot of it. And so I would feel like there would be the need for a very small public outreach peer initially to get feelings about what the vulnerable resilience issues are that are really special to Mountain View, or not special to Mountain View, that's not the way to think of it, that are sort of as Bruce England was saying, you know, we have our own little corporate, our community, and that fit into ours. I mean, we all know the generalities. You've listed all those generalities, you had that beautiful slide with all those generalities of, you know, the air, the adaptation, all that, and those are all very valid. But I just don't feel like a big effort initially is really was appropriate, because I think that identifying the technical things that we need to do to move forward, many of which were identified in the sustainability plans by the sustainability task force, is important in how we carry those out and how, you know, kind of how what those would cost. I think that's really important. But I think the resilience, it's I just don't see it as a huge initial discussion with community members. I don't really see that. I don't understand the necessity of that. I think that's kind of, but I do feel like after the resilience plan had been put together and the decarbonization plan had been put together, it would be very reasonable to have community outreach to say, what do you think about this? And how does this fit in with the problems you encounter? But I feel like going out to people initially and saying, you know, what are your resilient problems? I just think you're gonna get a lot of blank squares. I just don't understand how it's gonna work well. So that's a big part. And the other thing is, you know, I'm an engineer course, so I like technical stuff. I mean, and you know, I want to know what's the process train that we need to go through in order to meet this goal. And I feel like the wedge analysis in particular lends itself to that. And that's the kind of thing I'm really interested in understanding and having you understand very well, because obviously, you know, it's one thing for the council to understand that. I mean, we have to understand the policy, but the staff has to really get it enough so that you can carry it out. And that's sort of the translation exercise that I really wanted this project to do, to identify not just generally, but fairly specifically, what are what's the process train we have to follow in order to get to this decarbonization goal, and to educate the staff and the community about what those things are and what they will cost. And then to discuss about the vulnerability. So I guess my response would be to generally lower the public outreach program pretty substantially, maybe put a little bit more emphasis on the you know, on the technical, and then have the public outreach that is done toward the end be a little more extensive than I understood when I read this scope of work. And the other thing I would like to mention, sorry. In 2016, we were putting together our homeless strategy. We had a small one, but but there was a tremendous amount of interest in the community about, you know, how to work with our residents who lived in vehicles. And so we did a survey of them, and we paid everybody who took the survey an incentive of, if I remember correctly, it was a $25 Safeway gift card. But I would just urge you to, I don't know if you knew about that, and to go back and talk to the staff that worked on that and find out about how it worked. And I think at the time we felt it was very successful, although pretty much there were some questions that we left out. I remember that we were sad about. So getting information to get back to people, I know that was a lesson learned. You know, there may be something after we do the study and the survey that we want to handle. We want to be able to contact those people again. So we don't want it to be completely anonymous, or we like waiting. But anyway, so we do have a history of doing that and paying people. It's not the thousands of dollars that is in here, but that doesn't mean, I mean, I don't know what the amount of money should be. I just wanted to tell you that we do have this history of doing it. And let's see, what's the other thing? Do we want to see the questions? Should I go back to the questions? Or,
I think you've kind of
Answer
answered
the
comments, yeah.
okay, all right.
I got it.
Thank you. And the other thing I would like to say is, this is very challenging. So, although I have to say I was surprised at what I saw in here. I do think it recognizes evolution that has taken place in this field since we first brought this subject up. And that's good. I mean, it's really good that staff is saying, well, okay. I mean, I don't know what you said actually, but my feeling is that you know, you heard a clear message from staff and you said, well, that's right, that's what they told us, but the circumstances have changed. And so we need to respond to those changed circumstances. That is very positive. I'm really proud of you for doing that.
So, member Abbott, go ahead.
So as always, thank you for your work on this. And I appreciate my colleagues and what your comments. So I guess, yeah, I was trying to remember how this came about. And you're right, it was this question of whether we could achieve the 2035 goal. That's, you know, accelerate our strategies to meet that. And so this is pretty different from what I was expecting. And again, I think, you know, we've had the SAP, we've had all of these other plans. And I guess I was looking at, you know, an analysis of all of those strategies that we already have to see, you know, what would get us to 2035. And then, to be honest, I think the biggest barrier is resources, right? And we put in 7 million for our SAP, but that was a heavy lift for our city. And so the question is, what would it take? What's the heavier lift to get to 2035? So that's still my interest, because again, you know, plans are great, but we need to really implement and, you know, and that takes frankly money to do. So we should, you know, plan to figure out how to get the resources to do what we have to do, right? So this is very different, the way I read it. And as much as I appreciate the human centered strategy on this, I don't think, yeah, it's really for us right now timely, and I appreciate the mayor's comments about where public input should be, and I agree, I think it should be at the end too. I guess for me, like maybe I've been, you know, around long enough that I feel like the strategies, you know, we talk about it over and over. We have other, you know, SVCE has strategies, they have plans, they're working on a resiliency plan. So I don't know how much more new or different there's gonna be, to be frank. And so for me, rather than spending the time, studying all that, just saying, we just have to start working on it. Yes, I think there might be some unique situations in Mountain View, but I don't really know like how unique they'll be. And I feel like we know our community well enough to kind of see that or have seen that. Yeah, I feel like the focus is a little off from what I was intending with this. So the outreach, the public engagement piece for me would be more about, okay, here's what we need to do. How do we get folks to actually do it, right? And the barriers that have already been mentioned, like, yeah, not being able to get your solar panels, or, I mean, those are the stories that I would be looking for. Yeah, and then just also, I think we just need to do more education and outreach to the community to raise awareness of what's available. And then, yeah, and then how do we get the resources to be able to get folks to that decarbonization place? So, I looked at, I just looked up Cascadia. I looked them up earlier, and I actually am questioning whether this is the right group for us, if that's where we're heading, if we're moving our direction a little. Because it looks like they really are focused on community engagement and, vulnerable communities, which, yeah, is a part of it. But I really think we need to be looking across the board, for everybody in this community. And, admittedly, we have, a large segment that has high income. So they have ability to do some of this stuff, but they're not doing it, or they don't know what to do, so we need to, I think, really focus on across the board and making sure everybody is moving forward. So, to be honest, like with vulnerable populations, at the end of the day, it's resources, right? To get an EV, to get it like the e-bikes, folks, we just did that. If we can give everybody a voucher to get an e-bike or give more, then we would make that much more progress. So it's not, to me, that complicated, frankly. It's just, yeah, I think resources that we need to get there. So I actually would, look at going back and refocusing what the study would be, and then we might have to go out for a new bid based on what we decide.
So I basically pretty much completely echo what my two colleagues have already said. I think that the engagement with vulnerable populations, I would rather put off. I would rather do like our homeless strategy that's upcoming on our agenda, our work plan. And, maybe after that, we will, depending on, this will be a new council, depending on how council wants to focus this, possibly then we would, maybe we'd want to re-engage with that. But I think that for some time, that's not the part that I'm most afraid of, kind of like Member Abikoga said. A lot of the things that I think vulnerable populations would benefit from are things that come, the kits you're giving people in vehicles, maybe more shade structures or trees around our safe parking, which may come out in the homeless strategy. Maybe some other things relating to that. And then we'll also be seeing what our financial situation will be like. Should we engage or would we be over promising? But for now, yeah, I would be open to looking at a consultant that could focus really on, I guess what Mr. Showalter said, sort of the technical process train for getting there. I know you're already doing the work, but I think that there's I think that the train is not mapped out yet, and that's what I was thinking we were going to be using this consultant to do. In addition, I would like to really enhance our outreach to the people who are going to be, putting in the heat pumps and the solar panels and so forth. Because I think the outreach that we've done so far, great as it is, I've seen you all tabling and so forth. But at Earth Days and going to, social media, I don't see you on social media because I don't do it, but I've heard you there. But most people in my neighborhood don't engage with any of those things. Fewer and fewer people in my neighborhood are on social media. I think we're really gonna, and I don't know how many people are gonna join Cool Off. I think we're gonna have to people still open their mail, pretty much. I think we're gonna have to really engage with each and every person, not expect them to come to us at tabling events. I'd still like you to do those, but that's the other thing within this that I'd like to really enhance, because I know people who start doing these projects and then they just get stuck, really, really stuck. And I think that's one of the things that we have to work through. Maybe we have our own concierge, something like that, or maybe it's permit streamlining. But there's something along those lines, when I engage with people who are trying to do this work in their own homes, they're having problems getting through it. And so I think and they're not telling their neighbors good stories. Like, I put up solar panels and it was so easy, you couldn't believe it. That's not happening. So that's where I want to be.
Now, I would just have to say that in my neighborhood, that is what has happened.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Maybe your neighborhood can be the concierges.
Well, I don't know. I mean, we haven't done the heat pump thing, but we seem to have mastered the solar panels, and maybe it's
great.
also
Good.
because everybody just didn't question whether or not they had to upgrade their electrical panel. We just did it.
Because you don't live in a condo. Or a
And that's right.
townhouse.
And I don't live in a condo or a townhouse. And and then the other thing was we had several early adopters, and they were, making fun of everybody's electric bills. And
That's always helpful.
And I was like, well, if you'd done this, you wouldn't be facing these electric bills. And of course, that was motivating. But the heat pumps are, I know several people like myself who put in the heat pumps for the, cooling and heating, and that seems to work pretty smoothly. I can't say I've heard that much about the water heaters. That seems to be a bit of a bugaboo, but anyway, for us. But, there was something else I wanted to say that actually was much more on point. Oh, I wanted to get back to the point that the chair made earlier about the people who have the power to decarbonize, and the most part are many of them are reasonably well off, particularly apartment owners. And what can we do to, it seems like the single family issue, we have methodologies that are working, maybe not as quickly as we like, but we have methodologies that are working. But it seems like the multifamily one is much more of a social issue than the other. And it is something that I think really needs work. And, how can we reach those landlords and convince them that this is the thing that they need to do? I think that's really, that's a significant thing that this needs to include.
Actually, you reminded me, I remember way back when, I think we got grant funding and we did these energy audits where folks would go into homes and and that's what and maybe that's because, what I'm doing lately, but, I thinking maybe we have to get to that level where we go door to door knocking on. And I guess that's what I was thinking was with $500,000, how many folks could we get to go door to door? How many doors could we get versus doing the study? So that's really,
Yeah.
to me,
No, I
the, you
would
know, the issue of cost benefit and yeah, how we spend this funding. So, but I think, you know, we have to get to that level to get to folks, because it is very complicated. There's a lot of information out there that takes time to digest, and yeah, unless, you know, we're feeding it to folks, I don't think the majority, right, the vast majority of folks are not gonna come seeking it. But we have to get to that.
Yeah,
point
I mean,
where,
I know
you
people who've bought gas stoves and then I tell them, did you
Mhm.
consider induction? No, I
No.
wasn't thinking about
Right.
it and I would have. That's my sister. Anyway. So, you know, there are people who are open to it, but we do, I think, have to knock on their doors. It's not, they're not gonna come to our Earth Day booths and so forth. I think we need to make a more concerted effort and have a plan.
But that might not be the kind of thing we have to hire professional people to do. That might be the kind of thing we could organize a volunteer, you know, effort. I mean, somebody would have to
Yeah.
oversee the volunteers, but I know, there's some young people.
You
in
know how to
particular-
find people to knock on doors? Is that what you're telling?
Well, I'm getting better at it.
But I'd rather, you know, give a stipend to someone doing that than give a stipend to answer a survey.
Oh, yeah, I would.
So, but yeah, it's, you know, in terms of this funding, I think they're more effective.
Yeah.
Practical ways to use the money.
Yeah, but I mean, for instance, we have this wonderful Parks and Recreation summer program where they hire lots and lots of kids to, you know, be lifeguards and run daycare centers, not daycare, day camps and that kind of stuff. I can imagine where we could have, you know, a group of kids in the summer that go out and knock on doors and talk about this kind of thing.
And then, I'm sorry, and one more thing, I do have a different take in terms of apartment owners. I know we've done the studies and, you know, half of the apartment owners in Mountain View are called mom and pop. So I don't look at them as having lots and lots of money, and if you talk to them, they usually say that they can't afford to do an upgrade of, you know, even their 4 units, or like putting in, if a charging station's gonna cost 300, I mean, maybe that's because it's commercial, but I mean, you know, folks don't really have that kind of cash, and that's why we have to, you know, build in these incentives. And I know there's money out there, right? But again, I don't think they know about that. So it would be, you know, the 600 people that got the postcard doing the follow-up with them and saying, oh, did you get this? Are you interested? I'd like to tell you more. So I think we really have to get to that level of one-on-one, you know, contact with folks in our community.
Chair, may I offer a few proposals for consideration?
Sure,
Or do-
and I was gonna ask whether people had, whether committee members had more comments or wanted to start crafting a motion, but.
Well, I guess that was my question, is at this time, I don't, you know, I
Not
personally
really a
don't think
motion,
we're
just
ready
give
to
direction.
take this to the
Well,
council.
let's hear the suggestions.
Okay.
It feels like there have been some conversations that might fall into a couple of different categories. First, there's the desire to understand the progress that we've achieved across all of our other plans that have already been adopted. We would certainly be happy to come back with an update on where we are. What have we actually implemented? What are the things that remain? Just so that you can kind of take stock. That was already kind of on our radar for the fall, and I would like to suggest that we could agendize that for the next CSC meeting. And similarly, there's been a lot of discussion about outreach and all the various strategies. We're really pleased to have Whitney on board, and many outreach strategies are underway, and it seems like there might be opportunity to have a more in-depth discussion about all of the different ways that we can engage the community on decarbonization strategies in particular. So that could be the other part of the next CSC meeting, some discussion where we really start to map out what some of these, you know, we've told you about the water heater campaign, you know, we're trying to find incentives that are, you know, the most kind of decarbonization strategies that are the most financially viable to start with is like the foot in the door, but you know, as our first outreach attempt to engage the community. So, but we could have a much more robust discussion and actually come forward with some of our thoughts around what are some of the best practices that we're seeing. And then in terms of this contract, we can modify the scope. We can certainly decrease the outreach. We can also look at shifting the emphasis to the decarbonization part of the scope. We could have a wedge analysis for both 2035 and 2040. So we can say, what could it look like for us to aim at 2035 versus 2040? What are the different decarbonization strategies that might need to happen and over what time frame? So that could get more directly at kind of this what was felt to be an open question, you know, can we do it by 2035? Well, we can ask them to do two and look at two different timeframes, and then we'll know, you know, we can physically do it, but what does that look like? What does it entail? And so we can have them map it out for two different time horizons. That's not a problem. There is, you know, I know that it kind of came as a surprise to see us combining, right? Like we're looking at trying to integrate to be more holistic about our approach to climate change and not have it quite as siloed. We don't have to do a full integration. We do have the charge to do this vulnerability assessment. It was in the council work plan, also in SAP 4. We could focus the first phase of the work to just do the vulnerability assessment, which would be to take the countywide modeling and really tailor it to Mountain View. So what can we expect in terms of climate impacts? To develop some of those, I think we gave a few samples of like what the charts and maps might look like for a Mountain View. Just to understand, do this vulnerability assessment. That was our original commitment for the current phase of the council work plan that we're in. So we could Cascadia is able to do that analysis for us. It would require much less community engagement because we're not going to be developing. I think we can kind of name that as phase 1 with the option of amending the contract in the future. If we decide that we want to work more closely to think about what our resiliency response might be, we could have that discussion once and just amend the contract. We could strip it out of the contract for now. And then if we decided that we wanted to pursue it later, that would be a fine contract amendment. We could just come back to council with authorization to do that piece of it, knowing that we do want to do the decarbonization analysis, and that we do want to at least start to do the work of understanding what our climate vulnerabilities are. It was also, I think, in the ESTF. So the task force was calling for it, SAP 4 was calling for it, but just to understand, you know, what is the climate change going to look like? It will inform things like our biodiversity strategy. They actually are, we've been working in tandem with our colleagues in CDD so that as we get data about what the climate impacts look like, then they can help us think through, well, what species would be well adapted to our future climate scenarios. And so this information, you know, police would be, it would be very helpful for them to understand, well, how many extreme heat events are we looking at? Operationally, what might that look like for our call centers? So the information piece of just doing the climate vulnerability assessment could be valuable to many of our colleagues in the departments.
So
We
let
could
me
pare it
see,
down.
let me see if my notes are right. What you're suggesting is two things for an upcoming meeting. One is taking stock of what we've done already, and the other is a more thorough outreach discussion. And then I got 3 things for modifying any contract that I imagine you would be bringing to us also, but maybe that's just the way I'm imagining it. It would be modifying the scope of the outreach. I think I'm saying the same thing twice. Mapping 2 time horizons and doing a vulnerability assessment phase 1.
Right.
And then Margaret had brought up, is this the right contractor? Do you have more comments on that? Because that's a little outside of those comments. Or does anybody have comments on the notes I took?
I would expect, because it is a appropriation of funds, we would need to have it come back with the, you know.
A modified budget, of
Yes.
course. Yes, it would be significantly less.
Yes, and then like, I think I saw initial was like 250,000 plus there was that added 230. So I'd like to see how that's gonna pare down. But again, it just, this is just me looking at their website, but their focus on their website is about, which coming from me is odd, but it's very focused on, equity, diversity, BIPOC communities, which is important, but I guess I'm looking at this as a more technical study, so that's my question is, do they have, compared to the other, 50 bids we got,
Right.
Are they the most relevant to now our new scope?
We can provide, so if we came back to CSC at the next meeting later this year, we could provide examples. Part of it is that there's been this evolution towards increasing demand for some of those services. So it's not to say that Cascadia hasn't done deeply technical work also. It's that they're showcasing some of this other more emerging kind of body of work. But we can work with them to get samples.
Yeah, and I can add to, I mean, they've done a lot of, previously in their work, a lot of like waste characterization studies. I've worked with them back when I was solid waste.
What is a waste?
Dumpster diving.
Very fancy word. See if cities were meeting their targets or zero waste plans. So, I mean, they do a bit of, from my experience in working with them a long time ago, like Danielle was saying, that they've transitioned a little bit, but they still have technical expertise in doing the wedge analysis. And
yeah, I'm particularly interested in the wedge analysis, foreign term for me, but my understanding is you're looking at what don't we have to do because it's done elsewhere and what do we need to do? I'm very interested in that. I'm also very interested in a contractor that would have some building expertise, like how do we streamline, how do we get people to actually do it? How do we get the more difficult cases like the small mom and pop apartments, those kinds of things. What kinds of incentives do we need? How much money? Those kinds of, do we look at neighborhoods for cutting off gas or do we just let anybody come? Those kinds of technical questions, and they're building questions. And the reason they're building questions, of course, there's all sorts of other things that we have carbon emissions through, but I think, we have other projects. We have the biodiversity plan and the urban forestry and the council transportation committee and the active transportation plan. So I feel like this committee is really looking at electrification. That's like the overarching, and we have to coordinate with the others, but that's the big thing that hasn't been tackled yet. So I want a consultant with expertise in helping us with that.
Right, I mean, you're correct, like, that's why we have the block power program
Right.
for multifamily.
Right.
We have some things around EV charging infrastructure, of course, so a bit in the transportation space, but our colleagues are.
That's not active
Right,
transport.
and we do work a little bit on reach codes, with the buildings and then municipal facilities, the heat pump, the water heater, all of that is really building facing.
Where does I've heard that there's increasing electricity use because of large screens at home and AI. Is this are you counting that? I just wonder how the increase fits into when we're trying to electrify, but can we, because of the increase? I'm kind of interested in that.
This will incorporate work that we're doing kind of on a parallel track around overall grid capacity and kind of our demands on the grid in the
Grid
future.
capacity now and forecasting with
Exactly.
growing electricity.
So we're
use.
working on a separate scope of work to help us start to get at that issue, so that as we say that we'll be increasingly electrifying everything, can we show that the grid will be able to handle
Yes.
that?
Yeah, I think that's an important
Right.
part of this section.
That wouldn't be analysis that's conducted by Cascadia. We're in initial discussions with the National Laboratory, so it's much more technical group to at Stanford, at the Stanford
Okay.
Linear Accelerator.
Okay.
Oh, great. That's exciting.
Right, so very technical, like I don't know how to provide grid capacity demands.
Okay, but you'll
Nor does
report,
Cascadia.
maybe, when do you think you'll be able to report on that?
We should be able to report on that at the next meeting as
Okay,
well.
that would be great.
It's under city attorney review right now.
Okay, oh. Okay, so what more do we need? It's not gonna be a motion.
Right, it would be ideally direction to return to CSC with a reduced scope that's more focused on decarbonization, but that would still contain some vulnerability.
The assessment phase
And then-
one and a map for 2 time horizons, you said.
Yes, more
Which-
wedge analysis, and then also more documentation of kind of the qualifications of the consultant. Can they do this sort of technical work? They have worked with many jurisdictions. Most of their work is in climate action planning, so
Okay.
I believe that the answer is yes.
It's interesting because even in a staff report, it talks about community engagement and then it's like, oh, and the extra money goes to the wedge analysis. So to me, it should be flipped.
We're happy to modify this
Yeah.
scope accordingly. Yeah, I think we can adjust the scope. That's why the conversation before it comes to council.
So do you need any more? I've taken notes. I think you're taking
So-
notes.
Yeah, so do you need a motion? Do you need a motion?
I don't believe you would be directing us to come back.
Yeah.
And then eventually, ideally, a motion to go to council, the recommendation to council.
We
But
need to vote on coming back, or you're just, no, okay.
I don't
Trust you,
think
you'll
so.
contact
We
us.
will come back.
In a minute.
Yes.
Do we have a date for the next meeting or?
I will probably be emailing you, later this evening about setting up a date. I would think it would take us maybe a month or so to modify this.
So maybe November?
Uh, we're in October,
Okay.
so that we could come to council in November, if that seems reasonable to all of you.
Yeah.
We'll see about some of the other pieces. We could just have 2 meetings in the fall, one to finalize the recommendation for this, and then one to give the other updates that we discussed. So we'll reach out to see what your preference is.
Okay, great. I think that's clear. So now we're moving, if there are no further comments, we're moving to item 6, which is committee staff comments, questions, and committee reports. No action will be taken on any questions raised by the CSC at this time. Do any CSC members or staff have comments or questions? But I have a committee. Okay, make a committee report.
Yeah, I'd just like to share that, I'm active in the National League of Cities Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources Policy Committee, and we are actively involved in developing the resolutions that will be considered at the next general conference, which is I think the 12th, sort of the 16th of November. And I was able to get added one resolution a couple of years ago about the increasing the beneficial use of dredge sediments for flood protection and for sea level rise protection projects. Because a lot of that material is just wasted and it can be, a building material. So that got into the Word up and it's kind of moving through. And I also tried, but it we haven't quite gotten there yet, to get another resolution to update the electrical resource and conservation and recovery. The act that was in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals decision that struck down our reach codes, to update that. And we did have a presentation at EE&R about it from one of the attorneys that had argued it. And she had some suggestions about how we would go about it, but it was felt that it was just a little too late in the season. So everybody's really interested in it and we're gonna try and do it next year. So I just wanted to say that we're gonna work on that because I do feel like, you know, we don't want them to have that old law to cite. New version.
No, we don't.
Okay, thank you. Any other reports? Okay, then we are now on item number 7, which is adjournment. And this meeting is adjourned at 8:30 exactly. PM. Thank you.
Thank you.
Who gets these? Oh.